My name is Jenna Callahan. I'm 39 years old. I served as a Marine Corps officer for almost 2 decades. I held the rank of lieutenant colonel when I retired. I never imagined that the worst battlefield I'd ever step onto wasn't made of sand and blood, but of polished marble floors, designer suits, and the cold-cutting words of my own family. It was the grand opening of the gun store my father and younger brother had dreamed of for years. I stood there dressed simply in faded jeans, an old leather jacket, and a cap pulled low. People swirled around me in tailored clothes, champagne glasses in hand, laughter echoing off the pristine glass walls. And then it happened. My father, flawless in his crisp navy suit, took the microphone. I remember his voice. It wasn't loud, but it cut sharper than any blade I've ever known. He said, "Everyone knows my daughter used to carry a rifle, but these days, it's better if she doesn't touch any weapons at all. You know, she can't really control herself anymore." There was a beat of stunned silence, then laughter. Polite at first, then sharper, louder. I stood frozen. My palms clenched so hard under my jacket that my fingernails broke the skin. The sting of pain was distant, drowned by the flood of humiliation. Someone behind me, maybe a stranger, maybe a family friend, whispered, just loud enough, "Oh, that's the daughter who got kicked out of the military. Isn't she the one with PTSD or something?" The words wrapped around my throat like barbed wire. I couldn't breathe, but I wouldn't break. I kept my eyes fixed on the glass display at the center of the store, on the weapon that had once been my lifeline, the M1 Garand. The same model I had carried through mud, through fire, through death. And now I wasn't even allowed to touch it. The world around me blurred. The clink of glasses, the sneers, the hollow laughter. All of it merged into a cruel symphony of betrayal. I stood, and I said nothing. The M1 Garand sat under the glass like a relic from a life I no longer belonged to. I could see my reflection in the polished metal. But the woman staring back wasn't the Jenna Callahan who'd led men through the dust storms of Kandahar. She was hollow, forgotten. I didn't need anyone to tell me what I already knew. I was no longer welcome, not in this place, not in this family, not in their carefully constructed facade of success and respectability. I remembered the weight of that rifle in my hands, the smell of gunpowder mixed with desert air. I remembered the cold steel that pressed against my shoulder as I pulled a fellow Marine out of enemy fire, bleeding, shaking, but alive. 5 lives. 5 people who made it home because I didn't let go. But none of that mattered here. Here all they saw was the broken soldier, the daughter who came back different, the sister who wasn't good enough for cocktail parties or family portraits. A little boy nearby tugged at his mother's sleeve, pointing at me with innocent curiosity. "Mom, why is that lady so sad?" The question nearly undid me. I felt my lips twitch into what must have looked like a smile, but I wasn't smiling. I was unraveling from the inside. They mocked me for failing. They humiliated me in front of everyone. They said I was just a disgrace who shouldn't even touch the rifle I once carried to war. They laughed. They didn't see what was coming. I turned. I couldn't stay. I had to leave before the cracks inside me shattered into something I couldn't contain. But then I heard it. The sound of boots, 12 pairs of boots striking the marble floor in perfect rhythm. It wasn't loud, it wasn't rushed, but somehow that steady cadence cut through the noise, through the music, through the laughter like a blade slicing through silk. I froze. I turned back slowly. 12 men in worn uniforms stepped into the store. Their jackets carried patches faded by sun and war. Their eyes carried the weight of things unspoken, and every single one of them, every single one walked with purpose, with memory. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. I recognized them before my mind could even form the thought. Faces I hadn't seen in years, some I thought I'd never see again. Brothers in arms, men who had bled beside me, men who owed their breath to the decisions I'd made in the chaos of war. And there they were, here, now. The laughter in the room died. The smiles froze. No one moved. No one spoke. I stood at the center of it, all the weight of betrayal still burning on my skin. But suddenly, I wasn't alone. I didn't need to turn around to know they stood behind me. I felt it in my bones, in the marrow of who I was. And in that moment, one simple truth rose in my heart. I didn't need to defend myself. I didn't need to explain. Because the people who mattered had never forgotten. Minutes later, they didn't see what was coming. But I did. I always did. I don't remember exactly when I stopped hearing the laughter and started hearing only my heartbeat. But I know the moment I looked up and saw my father's face tight-lipped smiling for the crowd, but not for me. I felt a weight in my chest that even the heaviest body armor couldn't match. I tried to steady my breathing as I moved toward the display case drawn to the M1 Garand, like a moth to flame. My fingers hovered just above the glass, trembling. I didn't want to hold it. I just wanted to feel close to something that once made me. And that's when my brother's voice cut through the air loud enough for everyone to hear. "Careful there," he said, forcing a laugh. "Wouldn't want you to have one of your episodes." The words hit like bullets. People nearby chuckled, some shifting uncomfortably, others smirking. My hand dropped to my side, but it wasn't over. My father stepped forward, clinking his glass to call for attention. "Let's take a moment," he announced, "to recognize the people who made this possible, my family." I stood still, breath shallow. He gestured toward my brother. "My son Daniel," he said proudly. "The backbone of this store. The future of the Callahan name." There was applause, smiles. And then his eyes flicked to me, narrowing. "And of course, my daughter Jenna, once a Marine. Now." Well, he paused for effect as the crowd murmured. "Let's just say she's moved on. And today, out of respect for the future of this business, we're formalizing the next chapter. As of today, the Callahan name and this legacy belongs solely to Daniel." A silence fell that felt colder than any battlefield I'd ever known. No one clapped. No one laughed this time, but no one spoke up either. I could feel the heat rising in my face, the sting behind my eyes, but I held it. I bit down on the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. I wanted to leave, but my feet wouldn't move. The people I fought for, the people I bled for, my own family, had just erased me like I was nothing, and in front of strangers no less. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a soldier. I felt like a ghost. I don't know if I would have remembered how to walk out of that room if it hadn't been for what happened next. I caught sight of them out of the corner of my eye. 12 men, not young but not old. Faces marked by time, by hardship, by battles that don't appear in textbooks. They moved through the double glass doors, quiet, precise. No announcement, no fanfare, just presence. At first I thought I was imagining it, some cruel trick of my mind replaying ghosts from my past. But as they drew closer, I knew. I knew every face, every stride, every insignia half faded on every sleeve. We had bled together in places the world forgot. We had carried each other across deserts, through smoke, through gunfire. And now they were here. I don't know how they found out. Maybe someone saw the event on social media. Maybe one of them still kept tabs on the world I left behind. But somehow they knew. Somehow they came. I could feel the shift in the air. The crowd's laughter died down, replaced by hushed murmurs. People stepped aside without even thinking, sensing something without understanding it. These were not men who needed to raise their voices to command respect. They carried it with them like a second skin. I locked eyes with one of them, Staff Sergeant Alvarez. The last time I saw him, I was dragging him bleeding out of the wreckage of an ambush. He gave me a small nod. Not dramatic, not exaggerated. Just acknowledgement. I swallowed hard. My throat was dry. They weren't here for spectacle. They weren't here for revenge. They were here for me. For the first time that day, my heart steadied. Not because I felt safe. No, I stopped believing in safety long ago. But because for the first time in what felt like years, I wasn't alone. There's a moment in every deployment when you realize you might not make it home. For me, that moment came outside Kandahar in the searing heat under enemy fire that didn't seem to stop. I had taken a hit, lower abdomen. I remember the burn, hot, sharp, but somehow distant. I remember falling. And then I remember the faces of my team as they pulled me back, defying orders, defying odds, because leaving me behind wasn't an option. I survived. They survived. But something in me didn't come back. They pinned medals on my chest later. They called me a hero. But when the uniform came off and the medals gathered dust, no one cared. Not my father, who said I should have stayed in college instead. Not my brother, who joked about my meltdowns like I was some broken toy. I tried to rebuild. I tried to believe in family. I even told myself once that maybe if I kept showing up, they'd see me. they'd choose me. But they never did. Standing there in that store, I finally understood something I should have known long ago. Sometimes the war you fight at home leaves deeper scars than the ones you carry from the battlefield. And sometimes, the people you call family are the ones who wound you most. I chose them once. I chose family over myself. But they never chose me back. And that realization hurt worse than any bullet I've ever known. I knew I should have left the moment the laughter started, but I didn't. I stayed. Maybe some small, stubborn part of me still believed there was something left to salvage some thread of loyalty or love that hadn't been completely severed. I stood there frozen as my father cleared his throat again, lifting his glass like he was giving a wedding toast. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice smooth, full of polished charm, "thank you all for being here on this special day. This gun store represents the culmination of hard work, family values, and vision." The word family tasted bitter. He smiled at the crowd, then let his gaze drift casually, deliberately toward me. The pause stretched, long enough for people to follow his eyes, long enough for every set of eyes in that room to settle on me. "Of course," he continued, "not every journey is the same. Some of us stay the course. Some take detours." Soft laughter rippled through the audience. My heart pounded. My hands stayed locked at my sides. He went on, his tone light but cutting. "My son Daniel has been the backbone of this venture. His dedication, his integrity, his loyalty. He embodies everything I could have hoped for in the next generation of the Callahan name." There was polite applause. I didn't move. Then his smile faltered just slightly as he shifted toward me. "And then there's my daughter," he said. His voice dipped quieter but sharper. "Jenna." The sound of my name was a slap. "A soldier once," he added, "but as you can see, life takes its toll. Some people come back different." The air tightened. I could feel it like a vice around my chest. "She did her part," he said with a nod. "But the future of this family, the future of this store, rests with those who are stable, who are capable, who are present." I felt something shift in the room. The discomfort, the sidelong glances. I wanted to say something, anything. But the words wouldn't come. My father raised his glass higher. "And as of today," he declared, "we're making that official. I've amended my will. The Callahan name this business, the legacy, it all passes to Daniel. From this day forward." Silence. Then a few claps. Awkward, uncertain. Some people smiled stiffly. Others avoided my eyes. My brother Daniel grinned. Smug. He patted my father on the back like he'd just won something. He didn't look at me once. I swallowed hard. The air tasted sour, metallic. I caught my reflection again in the glass case. The M1 Garand gleamed under the spotlights. I remembered the first time I held one. I remembered pulling the trigger with hands steadier than I'd ever thought possible. I remembered saving lives, holding a perimeter under fire for 12 straight hours with blood running down my side. But none of that mattered now, not to them. A low murmur buzzed through the guests. I heard the words without fully processing them. "She has PTSD, right? Didn't she get discharged early?" Honestly, they're doing the right thing. I felt weightless and yet impossibly heavy, like my body no longer belonged to me. My father didn't meet my eyes as he stepped down from the small platform. Daniel took the microphone and launched into some rehearsed speech about inventory firearms community pride. But I wasn't listening. My pulse roared in my ears. I stood motionless, hands clenched into fists so tight I could feel the stickiness of blood where my nails dug into my palms. I wasn't angry, I wasn't sad, I wasn't even surprised. I was empty. I realized in that moment that I could have died overseas. I could have never come back. And they would have mourned me for a day, maybe two. And then they would have moved on just like this. Just like now. The betrayal wasn't sudden. It had been years in the making. This public spectacle was just the final nail in a coffin they had been quietly building for me since the moment I stepped off that plane. And still, I said nothing. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I stood in the middle of the room, the weight of my father's words pressing down on my chest, and I let the silence swallow me whole. Because sometimes, silence is all you have left. I don't know how long I stood there. Time felt fractured, like the tick of the clock had snapped somewhere deep inside me. Voices swirled. The sound of my brother still speaking, still basking in the applause. The music starting back up, the clinking of glasses, but none of it felt real. I wasn't sure if I was still breathing, until I heard it. Boots. 12 sets of boots striking the polished marble floor in perfect measured rhythm. The sound pulled me back like a rope yanking me from the deep. I turned, and there they were, 12 men, not young, not old. Faces marked by time, by sand, by the ghosts of wars most people preferred not to remember. Their uniforms weren't formal, just the worn-down jackets, the faded patches, the well-loved boots of men who didn't need ceremony to wear their service on their skin. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The energy in the room shifted instantly. The laughter stopped. The background noise faltered. People turned. People stared. No one knew what to make of it. But I knew every face, every step, every scar. We had bled together. We had buried brothers together. We had carried each other through the kind of hell most people only see in nightmares. I swallowed hard. My throat was dry as bone. They moved in formation without even meaning to. Old habits never fully die. They didn't rush. They didn't hesitate. One by one they stepped through the wide glass doors of the store, boots echoing softly on the tile. The weight of their presence pressed against every corner of that room, louder than words, sharper than any speech. The crowd shrank back without realizing it, as if something primal inside them recognized the shift in air, the gravity of the moment. Even Daniel faltered mid-sentence. His hand dropped from the microphone. His mouth hung open. My father stiffened. His knuckles whitened around the stem of his glass. I held my breath. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. They stopped when they reached me, half a step behind, but close enough that I could feel the heat of them at my back. 12 men. Silent. Still. The store had fallen so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the ceiling lights. No one spoke. No one dared. And then one of them, Staff Sergeant Alvarez, stepped forward. His face was etched with lines I remembered too well. He didn't look at my father. He didn't look at Daniel. He looked at me. In his hand he held something. Slowly, without ceremony, he reached out and placed it on the glass countertop. A photograph. My breath caught. It was old, blackened at the edges. The colors sun-bleached and smeared by dust. I knew the image instantly. 8 of us. Standing side by side, rifles slung low, uniforms filthy from 3 straight days in the field. Faces streaked with dirt and sweat. But smiling. I was there, center frame. Arms crossed. A smirk on my face that didn't belong to this version of me. I could almost hear the desert wind again. Almost feel the weight of the gear on my back. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. "What's that?" someone whispered. No one answered. Alvarez stepped back without saying a word. Another Marine, a man I barely recognized until his eyes met mine, reached into his pocket and set down something else beside the photo. A patch, frayed, singed at the edges. Our unit insignia. I blinked. My vision blurred. I remembered that patch. I remembered how it got burned. I felt my knees go weak for a second, but I stayed upright. The message was clear. Without a single word, without a single raised voice, they had spoken. They were here, for me. I didn't need to explain myself. I didn't need to justify who I was. They knew. They had always known. The room remained frozen, dozens of strangers staring wide-eyed, shifting uncomfortably, unsure whether they were witnessing a private moment or standing at the edge of something far bigger than themselves. My brother's face had gone pale. His hands trembled slightly as he set the microphone down. My father. I watched his eyes. For the first time in years, I saw something crack behind them. Fear, shame, I couldn't tell. But it didn't matter. I was no longer standing alone, and every single person in that store, every single person knew it. I didn't know what would happen next. I stood there still as stone, with 12 Marines behind me, and the weight of years pressing down on my chest. I could feel the eyes of every single person in that room. They weren't laughing anymore. And then one of them moved. Sergeant Alvarez stepped forward again, slow, deliberate. He didn't say a word. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. A phone. He tapped the screen once, twice. Then he gently placed the device on the countertop right next to the photograph and the burned patch. The video was already playing. No one spoke. The room shifted, people leaning in curiosity, overriding discomfort. The footage wasn't crisp. It was shaky, grainy, recorded from a helmet cam, or maybe a handheld in the middle of chaos. But it didn't need to be clear. I knew exactly what it showed. The sound hit first. Gunfire, explosions, men shouting orders, panic, adrenaline, survival. And then the image sharpened just enough. There I was, dragging two bodies through the dirt, bullets ripping past. I could hear my own voice, hoarse, desperate, screaming for cover, screaming for help. I saw the moment I dropped to my knees, pulling Sergeant Alvarez behind a crumbling wall. I saw the blood, the dust. I saw myself rip my own jacket off, press it against the wound, all while firing one-handed at the ridgeline above us. Someone gasped in the room. Someone else muttered, "Oh my God." I stood motionless, my hands at my sides. I hadn't watched this footage in years. I had forgotten most of it, or maybe I had forced myself to forget. But the evidence was there, inescapable, undeniable. The video played on, showing the rest of my team, battered and bloodied, crawling to safety behind me, showing me refusing the medevac until every last man was accounted for, showing what the medals, the ribbons, the empty thank yous could never quite capture: real, raw, unforgiving. The sound in the store had evaporated. Even the clink of glasses had stopped. No one moved, and then slowly the video came to an end. The screen faded to black. The silence that followed was absolute. I looked down at the countertop, at the photo, at the patch, at the phone still glowing softly under the glass lights. I didn't feel pride. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired. I could hear a woman near the front whisper to someone beside her, "That's her. That's really her." Someone else, a man this time, shook his head, his voice barely audible. "She saved them. All of them." But I didn't lift my eyes. I couldn't. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely think. I remembered every scream, every wound, every name. I remembered the weight of Sergeant Alvarez's body slumped across my lap as I kept pressure on the wound. I remembered the sound of my own breathing inside my helmet, ragged, uneven, half sure I wouldn't make it home. And now, here I was, reduced to a stranger in my own family's story, until now. The shift was slow but palpable. I could feel it, in the way the guests looked at me differently, no longer with pity or mockery, but with something else, something closer to respect, or maybe guilt. I lifted my eyes finally, saw my brother Daniel, his face pale, his hands trembling at his sides. Saw my father, who for the first time wasn't wearing that smug, polished expression. Instead, he looked small, lost, like a man who had just watched the ground beneath his feet give way. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The video spoke for me. The proof was right there, alive, undeniable, unerasable. I heard the soft buzz of phones. Someone had filmed the entire moment. People were already sharing it, uploading, texting, whispering. It was only a matter of time before this spread beyond the walls of the store. I didn't care. Let it spread. Let the world see. I hadn't come here for revenge. But justice has a way of finding its own voice. For a moment, no one moved. The air inside the store felt thick, suffocating, as if time itself had stumbled to a halt. All I could hear was my own breath, steady, quiet, and the distant hum of the lights above. Then it happened. My brother Daniel shifted first. I watched his fingers twitch, nervous, agitated. He reached for the microphone he'd set down, then thought better of it. His eyes darted from face to face, looking for someone, anyone, to tell him what to do. There was no one. My father cleared his throat. The sound cracked brittle. He forced a tight smile, the same kind of forced charm I'd seen him wear at country club fundraisers and political dinners. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice unsteady, but trying to reclaim authority we all have. "Stories, memories of service, sacrifices. We honor them all here, of course," but he faltered. He could feel it too, the shift. The way the room no longer bent around him, no longer orbited his words. The balance had tipped, and he knew it. I watched his hands. The wine glass he held trembled, liquid sloshing dangerously near the rim. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. Not of me, but of something far worse: exposure. Loss of control. He swallowed hard, tried again. Look, he said, glancing at the guests, we're here to celebrate family. A new beginning. The past is the past. Another weak smile. No one laughed. No one clapped. I said nothing. I didn't move. Behind me, the Marines stood motionless. Their silence was heavier than any speech. Their presence alone was enough to fill every corner of the room with something my father could never buy or command respect. Daniel stepped forward, then his voice brittle, desperate. We didn't mean any disrespect, he said, aiming his words at the crowd instead of me. It's complicated, you know. Family stuff. His eyes flickered to the video still playing silently on the phone. The burned patch, the photograph. His jaw clenched. I saw at the exact moment when panic started to eat at the edges of his composure, the way his breath quickened, the way his hands refused to stay still. He wasn't sorry, neither of them were. They were afraid of the story slipping beyond their control, of the whispers already spreading of the phones, discreetly raised by some of the guests now recording, uploading, sharing. And it was too late. One of the Marines shifted his stance slightly behind me, the soft creak of leather breaking the stillness. He said nothing, none of them did. But their silence was deliberate, sharpened by years of discipline. I felt their weight at my back, steadying me without a single word. I kept my eyes on my father. His mask cracked further. I saw it in the tight line of his mouth and the sweat beading at his temple. He knew. He knew the moment had slipped through his fingers. There was no speech that could fix this. No clever redirection, no charm offensive. For years they had made me small. For years they had rewritten my story in their image, painting me as the broken one, the burden, the failure. But now the truth stood right beside me. And the weight of that truth was undeniable. The room remained still. Some of the guests shifted awkwardly, some avoided my eyes entirely, but I felt it in the air. The power had shifted. Permanently. I didn't need to say anything. I didn't need to scream, to point, to accuse. The facts stood on their own. And my family, my so-called family, stood exposed. I held my head high. And I stayed silent. I don't know how long the silence held. The weight of it pressed against my skin, against the breath in my lungs. I could feel the way the crowd shifted, restless, uncertain, caught between the remnants of my family's charade and the undeniable presence of the men standing behind me. And then quietly, one of them spoke. It was Sergeant Alvarez. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. She saved us, he said simply. The words cut through the air like a blade. I could see the way heads turned toward him, drawn in by the calm certainty of his tone. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at my father or my brother. He looked at me. His eyes were steady, the kind of steady only those who've seen the worst of the world can carry. She pulled me out when the others thought I was already gone, he continued. Enemy fire was everywhere. No backup, no cover. I was bleeding out. She didn't leave me, she carried me. He paused. Without her, none of us would have made it back. The room stayed frozen. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the store's overhead lights and the shallow breathing of people realizing too late that they had been standing on the wrong side of something that mattered. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The memories were too sharp, too alive. I could still feel the desert wind hot and dry against my skin. I could still smell the gunpowder, the blood, the sweat. I remembered the weight of Alvarez's body over my shoulder, the strain in my legs as I dragged him through sand and stone, the searing pain in my side from the round that had torn into me, the warm rush of blood I tried to ignore. I remembered the moment I truly thought it would be the last thing I ever did. But I didn't stop. I didn't give up. And hearing him say it now, hearing those words spoken aloud not by me, but by someone who had lived it alongside me, something inside me shifted. I lifted my eyes and met his gaze. I gave him a single nod, small, steady, silent, and he nodded back. That was all. Nothing more needed to be said. The others remained still, a silent wall at my back. I could see the confusion, the unease rippling through the crowd. They didn't know how to process what they were witnessing. It wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't a fight. It was truth, undeniable, unshakable, and I stood in the center of it, finally seen, finally remembered, without a single word, I left the store before the whispers turned into full conversations. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The weight of it clung to me as I stepped out into the fading afternoon light. The laughter that had died, the words that had hung in the air too long, the faces that couldn't meet my eyes anymore. But the story didn't stay behind those glass doors. It never had a chance. I didn't know who filmed it. I didn't know who shared it first. But by the time I reached the end of the street, my phone buzzed in my pocket. And then again, and again. I didn't check it, not at first. I kept walking, one foot in front of the other, muscles stiff, heart pounding in the rhythm of footsteps I couldn't shake from memory. I found myself on a park bench 2 blocks down. I sat there for a long time, barely breathing, barely moving. The weight of the day pressed down on my bones, like gravity itself had thickened. It wasn't until the sun dipped lower, casting everything in gold and shadow, that I pulled my phone from my pocket. Dozens of notifications, messages, missed calls, links. I tapped the first one without thinking. There I was. Grainy footage. The store, my father, my brother, the Marines. And then the video of me, dragging Alvarez through fire, holding the line, bleeding, fighting, refusing to fall. The caption read, "When you disrespect one, you disrespect them all." I felt something cold settle in my chest. I scrolled and scrolled. The video had already been shared across multiple veteran forums. A National Veterans Association page had reposted it, with the headline, "A Forgotten Hero." People were commenting, dozens, then hundreds. "She's a real one. That family should be ashamed. Thank you for your service, ma'am. We see you." I blinked hard, jaw clenched. I hadn't asked for this. I hadn't planned it. But there it was. The story I had buried for so long, the truth I thought didn't matter anymore, it was out. And the world was looking. More messages. An old squad mate I hadn't heard from in years. "Is this you? Damn proud if it is." A woman I didn't know. "My husband served. Thank you for what you did." The notifications kept coming. I didn't cry, I didn't smile, I just sat there, breathing, trying to understand what it meant to be seen again. Somewhere behind the screen, the story was spreading faster than wildfire. People were outraged, not just veterans, but civilians too. Men and women who understood what it meant to give everything and come home to nothing. I saw headlines starting to appear. Marine veteran humiliated at family event. Rescued lives now rescuing her name. Hero or outcast. Viral video sparks, national debate. I could imagine the chaos unraveling back at the store. My father's tight smile collapsing. Daniel's empty eyes flickering. The carefully constructed image they had built around themselves shattered. And I wasn't even there to see it. I leaned back against the bench, closed my eyes. The wind stirred my hair. For so long, I thought I had to carry the weight of my story alone. For so long, I thought silence was the price of survival. But sometimes silence isn't strength. Sometimes the truth, raw, unedited, undeniable, speaks louder than any defense ever could. I scrolled again. The numbers had doubled, tripled, thousands of views, thousands of comments. Veterans sharing their own stories of being dismissed, forgotten, disrespected. Families speaking up. Strangers offering words I never thought I'd hear again. "You matter. We see you. Thank you." I let the phone fall to my lap. I exhaled slowly. I wasn't looking for fame. I wasn't looking for revenge. All I had ever wanted was simple, to be remembered. To be seen as more than the broken pieces others chose to focus on. And now, without my voice, without my intervention, the world had done it for me. The Marines hadn't needed to speak. I hadn't needed to raise my voice. The truth had always been enough. It just needed eyes willing to see it. And now, the whole country was watching. I didn't go back to the store. I didn't need to. But the images of what happened after spread almost as fast as the original video. Someone had recorded it, blurry footage from the far end of the showroom, shaky hands, but clear enough to capture the moment my family finally cracked. I watched the clip later in the quiet of my apartment, hands folded tightly in my lap. My mother, who hadn't spoken a word to me in months, stood near the display case, tears streaming down her face. She wasn't the centerpiece of the story. She never had been. But something in her, something brittle and long hidden, broke under the weight of it all. I could see her shaking. She pressed both hands to her mouth as if trying to hold something in, as if the sheer enormity of the shame had become too much to swallow. And then my father, the man who had built his life around power, around reputation, around control, he didn't speak. He didn't yell. He didn't even try to explain. He simply left. The video showed him setting his glass down on the edge of a table, his shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen before. He didn't look at anyone. He didn't look back. He walked out the door, each step smaller than the one before, until he disappeared beyond the glass. There was no applause, no farewell, only the soft rustle of whispers, only the quiet weight of consequences finally coming due. And then Daniel, my brother, always the favorite, always the one who stood taller when I was told to sit small, stood rooted to the floor, face, pale hands, trembling. He didn't try to follow. He didn't try to speak. He just stood there, blinking, his mouth slightly open like he might say something, but couldn't find the words. The crowd around him had thinned. The smiles had vanished. No one reached for him. No one offered comfort. No one defended what they had done. In that moment, he looked less like the golden child, and more like a boy who had lost the ground beneath his feet. I watched the clip twice, then a third time, not out of spite, not out of satisfaction, but out of something quieter, something heavier. I thought for a long time about the weight of the uniform, the weight of choices made far from home, in the dark, in the dust, and the weight of returning to a place where you're no longer seen for who you are, but only for what you are not. My family had rewritten my story a long time ago. They had carved out the parts that made them uncomfortable and left only the hollow shell of someone they could dismiss. But the truth has sharp edges. And when it finally cuts through, there's no going back. The internet didn't care about our last name. The veterans who rallied online didn't care about my family's standing in the community. The strangers who commented, who shared, who whispered. They saw something my own blood never did. They saw me. And somehow, that mattered. I set the phone down gently. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel victory. I felt release. The years of silence, the weight of being unseen, the endless ache of betrayal, something inside me loosened. Not because they had changed, not because they had asked for forgiveness, but because for once, the world saw the truth. And I didn't have to carry it alone anymore. I don't remember standing up. I don't remember walking away from the park bench where I first saw the video. But somehow, I ended up back at the old diner near my apartment, the place where no one knew my name and no one asked questions I didn't want to answer. I sat in the corner booth, the same seat I always took, hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug I hadn't touched. The Marines found me there. Of course they did. I heard the bell over the door chime. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. The weight of their presence had always been unmistakable. They didn't make a scene. They didn't speak at first. They just stood at the entrance in quiet formation, like they had done so many times in the past, in places far from this quiet stretch of road. After a long moment, one of them, Alvarez, stepped forward. "Jenna," he said softly, his voice carrying the rough edges of someone who'd seen too much, but still carried the pieces of it with grace. "Do you want to say anything?" The question was simple, honest, the kind of question that deserved an answer. I looked up at them, at the 12 faces that had stood beside me in more ways than one. Men who had seen me at my worst, who had trusted me when trust was all that stood between life and death. I met Alvarez's eyes. I could have spoken. I could have explained, justified, unspooled the years of bitterness and betrayal. I could have voiced the words I'd swallowed down for far too long, but I didn't. I felt my lips pull into the smallest hint of a smile, soft, tired, real, and I shook my head. Once. "No need," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't need to." He held my gaze for a beat longer. Then he nodded. The others moved closer, not to sit, not to crowd, just to stand nearby, silent, steady. No speeches, no grand declarations, just presence. And somehow that was enough. The truth was already out there. The story had already taken flight, carried by voices I didn't even know existed. For the first time in years, I didn't have to explain who I was or what I'd done. I was tired of defending myself to people who never really wanted to understand. Some battles aren't won by fighting. Some battles are won by simply refusing to sink. I wrapped my hands tighter around the coffee mug, the warmth barely reaching my skin. They stayed for a while, quiet, unmoving. No one spoke of the video. No one mentioned my father, my brother, or the store. We sat in the stillness, and I realized something that made my chest ache in the best possible way. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. And in the end, that was all I ever needed. The days that followed felt surreal. I had thought naively that the moment would fade, that the attention would pass, that people would move on as they always do. But instead, the story caught fire. It wasn't just one video anymore. It was dozens, different angles, different captions. Some people posted the moment the Marines walked in, calling it the silent salute. Others shared the combat footage, giving it titles like, "She saved them all." Within 24 hours, national news outlets picked it up. Within 48, I was everywhere, headlines, podcasts, interviews I never agreed to. I watched it unfold from my living room. Muted television, scrolling phone, endless notifications. Some called me a hero. Some called me a disgrace. And everyone had an opinion. I didn't respond. I didn't comment. I just watched. The division was sharp and fast. Veterans, military families, and ordinary strangers flooded the comments with support. "She's one of the good ones. She deserves respect. This is shameful. She bled for this country." But not everyone was kind. Not everyone cared about facts. Some posts twisted the story. She was discharged for mental instability. The family was protecting their business. Others said I was looking for attention, that I had orchestrated it, that I was unstable, dangerous. I read every word. It didn't hurt the way it used to. I think something inside me had broken a long time ago, so deeply that this kind of noise couldn't reach the core of me anymore. But still, it weighed on me. The arguments spilled into major news cycles. Talk shows debated it. Journalists published op-eds. One headline read, "Honor or Humiliation," the Marine who sparked a national conversation. Another, "When Families Fail Their Own," the Jenna Callahan story. I turned the television off. The radio interviews came next. People speculating about my mental health, about PTSD, about what it means to come home after serving, and then the politicians. Some used my name to call for better veteran care. Others used it to fuel whatever rhetoric they happened to be selling that week. I became a symbol, a headline, a trending hashtag. "We stand with Jenna, forgotten veterans." Silent salute. I didn't ask for any of it. I sat alone most nights, blinds half closed, phone buzzing, until I silenced it altogether. I kept to the same small routines: coffee in the morning, walks through quiet streets, the same worn diner where no one dared bring up the news. But I could feel the world shifting. I could feel the weight of eyes, millions of strangers who now knew my name, knew fragments of my story, but not me. Not really. The messages poured in, some beautiful, some hateful. Old comrades reached out. Families of soldiers wrote to say thank you. And then, buried in the noise, a message I never expected. My high school teacher, a woman who had once told me I'd never fit the mold of success. She wrote, "I was wrong. You made a difference. Thank you for your service." I stared at that message longer than any headline. The weight of it all pressed against me. Not because I wanted their validation, but because for the first time, the world was speaking the truth out loud. Even as the debates raged, who was right, who was wrong, something deeper had cracked open. A conversation about dignity, about the way we discard people when their stories no longer fit the image we prefer. I didn't need to win the argument. I didn't need every voice on my side. I just needed to know I wasn't invisible anymore. And somehow, in all the noise and all the mess, I knew that part was finally true. A few days later, after most of the headlines had begun to fade, I found myself standing in front of a small storefront window, not the gun store. Not anything familiar, just a quiet little place on the edge of town. I had gone for a walk without thinking about where I was headed. I needed air. I needed quiet. And there, through the glass, I saw her. A little girl, no more than 7 or 8. Her hands pressed gently to the glass of a display case. Inside was an old rifle, restored, polished, sitting untouched beneath soft museum lighting. She didn't tap on the glass. She didn't point or shout. She just looked. Wide-eyed, curious. Her small fingers traced the air above the weapon as if she could feel the weight of its history without ever touching it. Her mother stood a few feet behind watching her with that mix of patience and tenderness only a parent carries. I don't know what made me stop. I don't know what made me stay. But I stood there unmoving as something inside me shifted. For the first time in days, I didn't think about the headlines. I didn't think about the betrayal or the noise or the endless stream of strangers deciding who I was based on a 30-second video. I thought about her, about what it meant to grow up in a world where symbols of war and sacrifice sat behind glass untouchable, unexplained. About how innocence could still exist in places where I thought it had long since disappeared. The little girl smiled at something only she could see, maybe imagining a story, maybe building worlds in her mind that had nothing to do with the weight of reality. And I smiled too. Soft, unplanned, the kind of smile that reaches the eyes without force. She turned her head briefly, her eyes meeting mine through the glass. She didn't look away. I raised one hand in a small wave. She mirrored the gesture, her tiny fingers fluttering awkwardly, but sincere. Her mother smiled too, offering me a polite nod before gently guiding the girl away. I stood there for a while longer, watching the empty space where they had been. And somewhere deep inside, I felt something quiet settle back into place. In that moment, I thought, sometimes protecting something isn't about shields or weapons or loud defenses. Sometimes protecting means preserving the things that are still pure, still untouched, still whole. The kind of things worth carrying forward even when the world tries to strip them away. I exhaled slowly, and I kept walking. It came in the mail 2 weeks later. A simple envelope, no return address, just my name written in handwriting I hadn't seen in years, my father's. I held it for a long time before opening it. Part of me wanted to toss it in the trash without reading a single word. But curiosity, know something deeper, wouldn't let me. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No grand speech, no legal jargon. Just one paragraph written in careful, deliberate script. Jenna, I've spent my entire life building things I thought mattered. Businesses, reputations. A legacy I once believed was worth protecting above all else. But somewhere along the way, I forgot to protect the one thing that truly mattered, my family. I failed you. I failed us. And for that, I am deeply sorry. The will has been amended. You were always meant to be part of it. I hope one day you can forgive me. Dad. I read it once, then again. The words didn't hit me the way I thought they would. I wasn't angry. I wasn't moved. I just felt empty. The damage had already been done. And while I knew the apology was real in its own way, I also knew it came from a place of desperation, not transformation. The weight of public judgment had forced his hand. The outrage, the headlines, the viral images, they had cracked something he'd spent a lifetime reinforcing. But it wasn't for me, not really. I folded the letter carefully and set it aside. I didn't call. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. The will might have been amended. The words might have been written. But some things can't be undone. I wasn't angry anymore, but I also wasn't theirs to claim. Sometimes forgiveness isn't about opening the door again. Sometimes it's about choosing not to carry the weight forward. I let the letter sit untouched on my kitchen table, and I didn't read it a third time. I don't know how long I sat in front of the old wooden box. It was small, scuffed at the edges, the brass hinges tarnished from years of neglect. An ammunition box I had carried through 2 tours. I'd kept it all these years without knowing why. Inside were fragments of another life, patches, medals I never displayed, photographs from years that no longer felt real, and there in the corner sat the family ring, a simple gold band engraved with the Callahan crest. I held it between my fingers, felt the smoothness of the metal, felt the weight of everything it represented. I thought about the moments I had fought for them, the letters I had written home from desert camps and foreign soil signing everyone with love, Jenna, even when no one wrote back. I thought about the birthdays missed, the empty seats at ceremonies, the silence when I came home, and I thought about who I had become despite it all. I closed my hand around the ring. For a moment, I almost felt the urge to put it back on, to give it one more chance to mean something. But then I exhaled, slow, steady. I set the ring gently into the box. I closed the lid, and I locked it. Not with anger, not with bitterness, with finality. Some doors don't need to be slammed. Some don't need to be kicked open or sealed shut in rage. Some simply need to be closed. I placed the box on the highest shelf in my closet, out of sight, out of reach, and I walked away. Lighter, not free, but lighter, and sometimes that's enough. Maybe your story is different from mine. Maybe you've never stood in a room full of people and felt the weight of being erased. Maybe you've never carried the kind of scars that don't show on the skin. But I know this. We all carry something. We all know someone who's been forgotten. Someone who gave everything time, love, sacrifice only to come home to silence. A neighbor, a teacher, a parent, a friend. And sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remember them. Say their names. Tell their stories. Because silence can be heavy, but it can also be shared. So I'm asking you, if someone came to mind as you listen to this story, write their name in the comments. Tell us who they were. Tell us what they meant to you. Give them the voice they may not have had. Let this be more than just another video. Let it be a moment where kindness still matters, where dignity still matters, where we remember that behind every headline, behind every uniform, behind every quiet face in a crowd, there's a life worth seeing. I don't need to be the loudest voice in the room. I never have. But sometimes silence is an answer too. And sometimes the strongest thing we can do is not need to speak at all. Before I say goodbye, I'd love to know, where are you listening from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company when the world feels too still? Share with us in the comments. I promise we read every single one with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, I hope you'll consider subscribing to this channel. Not just to hear more stories like mine, but to be part of something gentle. A place where kindness still exists. Where healing is possible. Where second chances are real. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care. I'll see you in the next story.